Welcome all back to Election Time News, your one stop for political summations, poll reviews, and nonpartisan predictions. I'm here today with.
Politics Canada, welcome back to the channel, y'all. I'm here with a great person who also does election prediction videos, election time news, and we're going to be doing our own election prediction together.
So, me and Elections Canada have made our own separate maps based on how we think the election will go, and then together we're going to be comparing these maps and looking at poll data as well as polymarket odds and making a joint map together here that I have denoted based on. I've changed the name for the undecided candidate here, so you can always tell what map we're looking at. So to start things off, it looks like we basically have the exact same for the safe states.
Yeah, pretty much the exact same thing. I mean, there's not much surprise with, the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, and obviously the East Coast. But there are some questions with the swing states, which we'll get into, which will be quite interesting.
So how much do you think about the validity of some people's claims that Trump actually does have some sort of chance of getting a likely or even lower margins for breaking them down for Harris in places like New York or New Jersey? There was even a new poll that actually had New York polling at Harris plus 13, which was actually one less than the poll that was done a month prior.
I mean, I would. There's a lot of people that would wish that it was within 5 points or at least within some sort of margin in which Trump can win. But the reality is, it just doesn't seem likely that Trump's going to win New York. He's probably not going to win New Jersey, and we'll get to Virginia later on. But those states are pretty typically blue, and we're not really basing it on just polls. We're basing it on what's going to happen on election day. And if we're going to be really honest with ourselves, New York is probably going to go blue. New Jersey's probably going to go blue.
I mean, looking at Polymarket, obviously, we can get this up real quick. Look at that right there. I mean, we have a overwhelming majority. That's basically 100% for Polymarket. Anywhere above 95% on Polymarket is pretty much guaranteed. So, I mean, obviously, I mean, polls as well are going to definitely be overwhelmingly for Harris, even though there was only a plus 13.
Right. And then again, obviously these are odds, but 97% is quite a bit. And I mean, if I were Trump and his base, I would not really focus on states like New York because realistically, you're not going to win those. We'll get to Virginia in a second, but those are the type of states like Virginia and even North Carolina. You got to keep control of North Carolina because there are some questions about that with the whole Mark Robinson thing. And we'll actually make our own predictions on North Carolina. We'll talk about that in a second as well.
But there was a poll done a while ago that had Harris plus 14, and everyone was surprised that it was that much lower because I believe that Biden won the state by like, oh yeah, Biden won the state by 23 points in 2020.
Yeah,
So
so
the fact that it was down to 14, that's a 10-point drop
yeah,
in
and,
one of
and
the most
obviously we
populous
do
states in the
know
nation.
we obviously know that New York does have Wall Street, a lot of corporate executives, a lot of people that make a lot of money there. They tend to vote Republican for the most part in recent election cycles, at least, and they do like Trump. But I just don't think it's enough for Trump to actually win the entire state. Um, but then again, I mean, the fact that the margin has closed quite a bit is something. But there's also something to be said about states like Texas and Florida, which have actually been closing the margin as well. This time for Republicans, it's been looking pretty bad.
It's interesting because I mean, all these interesting safe states. As far as polarized as like the country feels like it's become, it's almost like these polls are showing that the states are becoming more swingy in total. These deep, safe states like California, Biden won it by 29. I think there was a poll for Harris that was only by 20. All of these states
Right.
are the first poll. There's only one poll out of Oregon that in which Harris is the nominee, but I'm pretty sure it has her up by 6. So like
Right.
every single state, even these really deep red or blue states, are even polling in at way closer to even margins than you might expect.
Yeah, and obviously, I wouldn't be really surprised if there was some sort of switch in some of these major states like Texas and California in the next coming years. But then again, focusing just on this election, it seems very unlikely that those states will be flipping, and that includes New York as well.
With all these signs, I mean, maybe in their their maybe in a hard right wing dream, they'll end up getting a red New York. The last time that happened was for Ronald Reagan, and
Right.
Trump is nowhere close to the bipartisanship that support that Reagan had. So it's not even a question.
Right.
Colorado, I think, has had some interestingly close polls. Yeah, there
Trump
we go. Now it's
candidates.
working. All right. So yeah,
Okay.
Harris plus 10, Harris plus 15. So I mean, I think I've seen somewhere that those were some. I mean, Biden won the state by 13 and a half. So both of those are still lower than uh, the 15 is a bit more
Right.
than Biden won, but this 10 won relatively recently by Morning Consult, which is relatively left leaning. If I'm correct, it's a small sample size, but still that is interesting, something to watch. That maybe things aren't as secure in Colorado as they may seem. I mean, we also saw
Right.
some things like there was a huge shift. If we look here, huge rightward shift in Hawaii. So from
Yeah.
2016 to 2020, that no one really expected. I mean, that was on par with like Florida's shift or Utah's. Utah was because of the vote that went from away from McMullen. Um, but basically, Hawaii and Florida are the two states that shifted for Trump in 2020. And Florida, it kind of makes sense. It's just continuing this trend. It shifted 2 points from 2012, but the fact that Hawaii has also been shifting so hard to the right, I think it might end up being a swing state in not quite a bit. I mean, it's nowhere close to on to anything even yet, but it is definitely something to watch for a few decades from now.
Right. And Hawaii is one of those states, obviously, we know why it may have shifted quite a bit. It's because one perfect example would be the wildfires. I mean, they had a terrible response by administration, and many people are pretty discontent with that. It was a big deal. Their economy relies a lot on tourism, and that got hit pretty hard. So I definitely do understand why it could be shifting right. I don't really know if it's going to shift right or to the center as a swing state anytime soon. I do kind of agree with you. It'll take a couple of decades. Um, but yeah, I
No
mean,
polls with
it
Harris.
could always happen.
No polls with
Yeah,
Harris.
it's
The pollsters think they know it's safely Harris. They don't even poll. I don't like when they do that. I want more information.
yeah,
All right, let's get to more contested states. I mean, New Mexico's to Harris, Maine, New Hampshire. I
pretty
didn't
much
put
all the
any of
Northeast obviously
any
is
of
going to go blue.
Trump's states yet. I mean, once upon a time, states like Montana used to be semi-competitive, but I mean, I think Obama only lost it by like 4 points.
Yeah, I mean,
2.3.
could you imagine?
McCain won by 2.3 points in
I mean, that's something.
08.
That's saying a lot because if you go to Montana now, it's definitely not leaning blue in any respect or
Yeah, I mean, Trump
even
won it by 16 in 2020.
yeah.
That's a huge.
So
That's one of the largest shifts. I, one of the largest shifts, I
yeah,
think.
14 points in about what, two elections? That's something.
Only 14. Interesting. They only went two. All right, so apparently it did definitely go.
Yeah, it's definitely going to
16.
go
Oh, it
blue.
went by 21 in 2016. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah,
14 to then 20, and then moving back to okay. So I mean, the polling's been nowhere close either. So all right, well, moving on now, we have, of course, Minnesota, Tim Walz' home state, as non-competitive as Ohio, essentially at this point, percentage-wise. I mean, Polymarket has
yeah.
93 and 94% for them, so they basically are saying that their home field advantage has essentially secured that state for each candidate.
Yeah, and my view on Tim Walz originally was that it really didn't make sense to pick him. That was my original take. Because I was just wondering why she would pass on someone like Josh Shapiro, essentially secure Pennsylvania. I was like, why is he doing that? Or why is she doing that? And I mean, then I started watching him a bit, and I started to realize why she would pick him. I mean, the guy is very charismatic. He's very likable for most people. Like for the most part, he's a pretty normal guy. And you compare him and his popularity numbers to JD Vance, and it's quite a contrast. I mean, for the general American, Tim Walz is a lot more likable than JD Vance. And again, JD Vance didn't really need to pick him. He's from Ohio. That's a pretty solid red state. And also keep in mind, I've been seeing some things, or I was seeing some things that Minnesota was potentially going to be contested. I mean, 6 points, that's not as much as I think they would like. I think they would obviously like a lot more. So it's still with like close enough, but it's not going to go to Republicans anytime soon. I don't think it will in this election for sure.
Yeah, the choice of their relatively popular governor definitely did secure this choice. I mean, it's been within it hasn't been within 6.5 points basically. It's actually been going down recently, but even at this rate, even if it accelerates a bit by election day, it's still going to be like 3 points for Harris.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
And
plus six,
obviously
plus five,
that's
plus 7. They're not really anywhere close. The interesting thing with this one, with
yeah,
almost twice as many voters, it is much closer to parity. But
right. That could mean something, but at the same token, just based on the current sentiment and the fact that it's Tim Walz's home state, I just don't see how it's going to go red.
all right, we got
So,
Virginia. So this one's been an interesting one this cycle. I
yeah,
mean, it
yeah.
it was get down to Virginia. It's Harris now has a 6.7 point lead, and Polymarket has her with an 89% chance of winning. But there were definitely concerns. I mean, there were even two polls in the past month that have had them even. One with Harris plus
Right.
1. This one Harris plus 10. So that and then Harris plus 6. Those are still relatively small sample sizes. I did not mean to do that. And
Yeah,
so
so
I'm
some of these numbers they seem pretty skewed, let's be honest. How do you go from 10 points to even?
not
So,
not very not
I
very
think
precise.
yeah, so I would take these with a grain of salt. I would say it's around probably 5 points or so. I just don't see how it could be 10 points, but I just don't see how it could be even either. And obviously Virginia, I mean, Republicans have been going for this for a while now. They've been trying to get Virginia for a while. And I still wonder what would have happened if Trump had picked Glenn Youngkin as his VP pick. Because I saw somewhere right before JD Vance was announced, I saw that Glenn Youngkin soared in the betting markets as the potential VP pick. So many people were thinking, okay, this could happen. And honestly, I don't know what would happen for sure. But if I were to guess, I definitely do think it would have been a lot closer. It could have been probably somewhere in the realm of Harris plus 2, as you see in that Research America poll. Um, but it's a state that I think eventually will go Republican. But at the moment, it'll go Democrat.
I mean, if the Republicans were able to if they were able to take Virginia, that would definitely change things up because then
Yeah,
even the Rust Belt trio win wouldn't even be enough. She'd have to pull off either North Carolina or Georgia, which would definitely be changing the game.
right. And I just don't see how, if she loses a state like Virginia, how would she be able to win a state like Georgia or North Carolina? It just
Oh,
isn't going to happen.
yeah, especially North Carolina with its proximity to Virginia. Most likely, they're also going to be swayed for the same reason why she's probably been polling better in Pennsylvania, even though she picked Tim Walz, because he's another one of the Rust Belt quartet. So that overall similarity is going to definitely help things as far as likability goes in those target regions.
Yeah.
All right, Texas, the second biggest. I mean, it's not necessarily close. 6.4 points. I mean, that's more than he won by in 2020.
Okay, wow.
8%
Yeah,
market.
88%.
Well, let's
And
have
again, I
it
mean,
as
Texas did obviously gain two electoral votes since 2020, right?
reapportionment.
And
Yep.
so obviously they have increase in population, and that also comes with some unintended consequences for the Republicans in the sense that many of these people are eventually going to vote Democrat because if we're bringing in more people, and the reality is that most of the people in Texas, most of the Hispanics and the blacks, tend to vote for Democrats. So the more that there are there, the more it'll shift blue, and we could definitely see Texas become a swing state sometime soon.
No, I mean I had originally thought that a few months ago, but then I've been seeing the trends heavily to the right in the Rio Grande Valley region, especially among the Hispanic vote. And mainly what's driving Texas going to the left now is uh the leftward shifts in the suburban regions outside of Dallas and Houston that have been going hard left. That's been actually countering the rightward shift here. These very, very deep blue regions. If you here, it's going to be very hard right. 30 points, 32, 39, 55 points towards
Wow.
Trump. So, I mean, but then outside here in these very large counties, right outside, here you have 11 points, 6.5, 3, 12 points with
Yeah.
dozens of thousands of people here, where there's probably that many in these multiple counties. So it's been moving to the left because of the suburban vote changing than the increase in immigrants in this region.
Right, and I obviously think that those regions that have been leaning very right are going to keep leaning right a lot more, especially with the border issue. And I know a lot of people, especially on the border issue, on the actual border, are definitely not content with the current Harris Biden administration, their policy towards it. So I do expect that. I mean, that 55 points, that could very well become 70 points or even 80 points. You could see, we'll have to see what happens. But I do think Texas, yeah, you're right. The suburbs have been shifting Texas quite a bit. But then again, that's pretty much what happens in every single one of these states. But I do think Texas, within the next two elections, will become a state that Democrats may have within their reach, and that'll completely shift the landscape
It would, I
for
think, I
Republicans.
think it would still take someone as charismatic and as groundbreaking as LBJ to take it, just because of not only the loss in the Latino vote in the Rio Grande Valley area, but the start of the breaking down of the Democratic grip on hardcore urban regions, especially among Black and minority voters. I EPO points this out a lot in his videos, but he has this graph where essentially just like Democrats from Biden like a 90% vote for the black population to Biden, where now it's like 60% for Harris.
Yeah.
That's a 30-point shift,
Yeah.
especially in these urban regions, especially in the Atlanta area, which is really where Georgia is probably going to be lost at this point. I mean, looking at its
Yeah.
polling, it's
Well,
definitely been. I think, yeah, Harris hasn't held lead since the very beginning of the month, and then Trump has been starting to pull away with it. I mean,
yeah,
poly
and what I've
market,
been saying,
it's Trump's second highest chance of winning out of any of the swing states.
yeah, yeah,
So I mean, it's and his chances in North Carolina have dropped like 5% since the beginning of the Robinson scandals. I've been watching. It was like 63, 64, right about on par with with Georgia and Arizona, and now it's already down to 56. So if this continues to drop, that could definitely say some things about how this goes. Because if North Carolina goes blue, I'm really not sure. I mean, looking here, I just had it blue just for fun, but I mean that would completely change this. I mean, he'd have even with somehow if he even just won Wisconsin, that would still just be better overall for Harris. But I don't see Wisconsin going red this cycle just because of how good the polling is. Because pollsters are obviously trying to fix their errors, even though Wisconsin had the highest polling error out of any of these swing E states, which includes Florida, Texas, Ohio, Iowa, from '08 to 2020. I still see that this is definitely going to tell a lot about how this might go, and so does Poly Market, just barely outside of toss up still, but Harris does have a notable lead in Wisconsin.
right. And obviously, Wisconsin, out of all the Rust Belt states, I think it is the most likely to go Democrat. We've known that for quite a bit now. But I think going back to Georgia for 1 second, I've been saying a lot of my prediction videos, I do think Georgia will go Republican. I've been saying that even when Harris was winning in Georgia, or even when it was tied, because I just don't see how a state like Georgia, which typically does vote red, by the way, let's keep that in mind. I just don't see how it will go blue again. 2020 was an unusual election. those types of elections happen once in a generation, where you have a state like Georgia, which has been so heavily Republican for such a long time, shifting, right? And obviously, you see on the screen, Clinton won Georgia a while back, but that was pretty much the last time that Democrats have won
One in a generation.
close.
Yeah, that was 92. That
Yeah,
was early millennials. So if this was the
right.
Gen Z election, then another one 30 years. But I mean,
Right. And
I think this actually has it officially shifting to the left because if we look at the Senate races that went on, um, I mean they won. Warnock got elected. Ossoff also won his race. So both Georgia senators are Democratic right now. When back in '92 we had one Republican and one Democrat. So I mean, it has I think it had a momentary shift back to the right, but then it has moved officially back to the left, especially with the growth of the Atlanta region in the
and
past few decades.
and keep in mind that Georgia, the main reason why it was lost was because of the black vote. We already know that. And the reason why Trump lost in 2020 is because black people in Georgia and Atlanta primarily were not happy with the way Trump was responding to Black Lives Matter. He set the National Guard in many of the states. He set the National Guard in DC. He was very dismissive of the concerns that black people had at the time, and that really did contribute as to the reason that they lost Georgia. And obviously, we know that the Senate race was very close. We had Warnock actually going in a runoff because it was so close. So Georgia is one of those states where I just think that was just a one-time thing for Democrats in 2020. I don't think it's going to repeat itself. And obviously, we know that Georgia, just like all those other southern states, tend to focus on the same issues that they always do, and they don't really think that Democrats are best suited for the next administration for the most part.
I actually personally think that 2024 is going to be an off year, and I think this is part of a continual shift to the left we're going to continue seeing in Georgia because Atlanta isn't stopping growing anytime soon. And with the leftward shift in a lot of white regions, especially suburban regions, white voters have been increasingly moving towards the Democratic Party, especially white women. And so, with that, I think that actually this is the first time that it flips that's going to start going to the left. And 2024 will be a slight Republican backlash, but then it's going to flip back and start consistently voting more Democratic, somewhat like Georgia, or I mean Virginia, where it was relatively close, but then it jumped back a bit, 6.3, but then it went back to like 3.9. If you shift this back by like 4 points or so, this would have been a slight win for Romney, and it would have been a slight win for Obama. So I think it's sort of what we saw in Virginia about a decade ago, but then it's going to continue getting bluer and bluer from there because of the growth and diversification of its largest city region, which is for Virginia, the DC metro region, which has had a lot of growth recently, which is why it's continued to shift to the left.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. So, where would you put Georgia? Would you say it's red?
It's definitely going red this year, yes. But the
Okay. Right.
future, I think it actually will continue to shift to the left.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I do see it actually going potentially blue in 2028. It's absolutely going to be a swing state in 2028. This isn't a continual right shift again. But as of right now, I do see Donald Trump winning Georgia by probably about half a point on election night.
Yeah, I think it'll be quite close. And if he does end up losing the election and he loses Georgia, best believe there's going to be some stuff going on with court cases and stuff because Trump will not give up this election. I can assure you if he loses it.
That's if he takes the loss. And I mean, especially if, you do end up getting a Rust Belt trio victory for Harris and Trump wins the rest, then what happens then? That would be within a few thousand votes. That is going to be really concerning.
Right.
Especially as someone that lives in, the state that is most likely to be the tipping point state.
Yeah. I think let's go to Florida for real quick because I think
Yeah,
I don't
this
even
is
think
going.
we need to look at the polls. I think Florida is obviously going to go
I mean,
red.
this one's
Um,
interesting. 600 registered voters, which isn't too big of a sample size, but Trump plus one. That's interesting. There's no real sign for anything as far as that goes. I mean, but that is an interesting poll right there. The fact that it's down to
yeah,
plus
and keep
one.
in mind, Florida did typically vote Democrat in the past, so it's only recently. And you got to give credit to Trump. He's sort of actually made Florida into a solid Republican state. So I don't know if Florida's going to go blue anytime soon. Definitely won't this election, and they are very happy with people like DeSantis and Trump, especially DeSantis. So there's
DeSantis and the senator's name both won by margins of over 15% in 2022.
yeah, yeah,
So I see Florida flying off to the right. It's not coming back. There's no boomerang on that. It's done being a swing state. It had its fun, but I see it basically becoming the new Texas from the Bush to Obama era. I think that Florida and Texas have almost sort of flipped places, except Texas is going to hold more on like North Carolina does, where it's essentially sort of a swingy state, but it's going to continue being red.
yeah. That could very well be true, and I think one thing to keep in mind, especially for Democrats, is that they lost Florida when Trump won in 2016. That was when Florida was completely lost to Democrats. Trump won in 2016. Trump won in 2020. DeSantis comes in 2018, wins it by a pretty commanding margin, and 2022 absolutely dominates the polls, and it's just not going to go blue anytime soon. I think I agree with you totally on that one, that there's no chance that Florida goes blue anytime soon.
So basically, that's secure. Now we're down to now for this cycle, the famous seven: North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and we already did Georgia.
Yeah.
Are a
What do
little
you
out of order.
tackle? Let's tackle Arizona first.
Arizona, probably the yep, that is the only other Republican state that we agree on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think obviously Arizona is one of those states that, again, sort of like Georgia, I do think it'll revert back to where it typically does, which is Republican. And we have seen some trends that indicate that Arizona could go blue. We had, I don't know what her name was, the governor of Arizona. She's now a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
She beat Carrie Lake by a pretty large margin, and Carrie Lake was
Hobbs.
endorsed by Trump. So that could be Hobbs. Yeah, there you go, Hobbs.
I mean,
Not a
Lake
big
is
margin,
now Lake's running
my
for
bad. But
Senate, and she's getting annihilated.
right,
So I mean,
that's the
it
thing. Yeah.
the question
So
is it Democrats performing well, or is it people not liking Carrie Lake?
yeah, and I mean, Carrie Lake did get endorsed from Trump. We got to keep that in mind. And we have seen in many cases where Trump candidates, like people who have been endorsed by Trump, have lost in pretty big margins. They've won in the primaries by commanding margins. But when it comes to a general election, they tend to lose sometimes. So I don't know if that's a Trump effect. I don't know if it's a Carrie Lake effect. Or it could very well be that Democrats have been doing better in Arizona. But I do think that in this election, Arizona will go back to Republicans.
It's going to be that backlash before it officially moves over towards the blue column. I think I see it and Georgia both potentially going blue again by probably like Maine 2020 margins. 2 to 3 points or so, even potentially a bit more than that. But I mean, I wouldn't see any like 5 point margin or anything. But I do
Right.
think that this is going to be the first the pushback of crossing over the line. I guess. But Phoenix is continuing to grow at a very large rate. It's the fastest growing city in the nation. It dethroned Philadelphia as the fifth largest city in the nation last year after the 2020 census. So I'm very disappointed. I mean, it's all down to Maricopa County, and it has been continually shifting to the left for a long time. So I mean, I don't 12 points since 2008 shifted five of those points were from 2016 to 2020. So I mean,
Yeah.
I think even though the state as a whole is going to go red, I think that Maricopa County is going to actually continue shifting blue, which is really where because the urban regions aren't going to directly, see the effects of the few immigration issues that are going on. I think that's going to be more the very southern parts of the state, especially Pima County, and Santa Cruz County. They actually shifted. Santa Cruz County shifted very hard to the right, the whole 12 points from 2016 to 2020. Yuma County by 5. So I think we're going to see these counties start to shift way more to the right. Then we're actually going to be seeing Maricopa going against it. But I think the rest of the state's actually going to shift to the right more than Maricopa can counteract. So we're going to end up seeing a red Arizona again.
Yeah. What about Nevada or Nevada, whatever you call it?
The sixth electoral vote state, 51-49 on Polymarket. That is
Hmm.
actually, oh, Pennsylvania dropped a percent in the past 24 hours. It was
Wow.
52-48. It has been neck and neck in Pennsylvania, but Nevada has had a somewhat steady 2 point Harris lead. So it's nothing big. You have it down as tilting Republican. I have it down as tilting Democrat. The main reason that I said it, I mean, this is basically nothing. You might as well just say flip a coin in the air. Heads is Trump, tails is Harris, and just go for it. But I mean, the real reason that I'm really doing it is because actually, Nevada is one of the very few states where, from 2008 to 2020, this is again, I'm kind of stealing from EPO here, but this formula actually has that Nevada is like one of only like, one or two states where the polls actually underestimate Democrats by like half a point or so. And so that, along with the 4/10 of a point lead that she has, which is very small, but she's held it on for considerably long, and Trump has barely held a lead in the state since Harris even got in mid-July. And I mean, we're seeing more even ones, which is a bit more concerning for the Harris campaign, but she's been slumping in the past 2 weeks. I'm not sure if that is because of some effect on mid to late September, or if that's just the post debate rush calming down or something, and this is more accurate to how we might see on election day. I'm not sure, but um, seeing again, 1,000 registered voters, Harris plus 5, Harris plus 4, Harris plus 3, Harris plus 2, Harris plus 2 from Republican leaning Trafalgar Group. I mean, these are all, relative, about a week to a week and a half ago. But um, there's still good signs for the Harris campaign. So also, plus just based on the fundamentals, the fact that it has last gone blue and only by, 3.5 points and then went blue for both times for Clinton. It's stayed blue considerably long. I do see it definitely potentially going red in 2028, but I think that we'll just barely hold on for 2024. What's your reasoning for going red?
Yeah, so Nevada is one of those states where I just don't see how it could go blue again. I just don't. And I think the main reason for that is because you look at the trends in Arizona. You look at the trends in states like Georgia. Those states reverted back to Republicans. But I think Nevada is one of those states that tends to overestimate Democrat support. I mean, can you take a look at the 2020 results? Can you just pull that up real quick?
It barely moved at all, yet the nation as a whole shifted 3 points to the left from where it did in 2020, or 2016.
So, yeah.
So as
I
as
mean,
as
only
a state compared to the rest of the nation, it shifted 3 points to the right.
Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind is Biden only won by 2.4 points, and that's really not that much. And by the way, keep in mind that he was leading in the polls nationally. I don't know about Nevada exactly at the time, but nationally he was leading by 8 points, and he only won Nevada by 2.4 points. But Trump
On election
is
day, he was leading by 5.3% in
okay,
Nevada.
yeah, and he ended up winning by 3 points less essentially.
I mean,
So if we're
he
following
that
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 trend,
was true everywhere, basically.
yeah, and I mean again, if we look at the polls right now, can you take a look at the polls right now? Win Nevada.
Oh, yep, I was looking for Georgia again for some reason. Oh wow. Yeah. All right. 5.3 now.
Yeah, point 4. I think it's a very close call. I think it'll be a very interesting one. I think it could actually be closer than Pennsylvania even. But I personally think, just based on the way it's been trending, and I know people that have been to Vegas recently and they've seen all the signs and stuff, and it's been a lot of Republican signs. But I, I just think personally that it'll go to Republicans. But then again, I see the argument made for why it could go blue. Um, I don't know. I'm not 100% convinced that it'll go
Signs.
blue again.
Let me just tell you, signs are absolutely a terrible way to determine whether or not area is going a specific way because Republicans are so much more vocal. I live in one of the most democratic regions in Pennsylvania, and the suburbs, very dense suburbs of Montgomery County. I believe Montgomery County voted, 26.3%. Now, most of that's going to be, the suburbs right out here, the very dense suburbs out here. But still, where I live, right around here, it's probably going to be like 15 points for Biden. Yet I see probably about 15 Trump signs, and there's, I think, one single person was a Harris Waltz sign. So it's just because of how much more vocal they are. So if it's anywhere close to parity or, even like 5 to 1, I'd say that's definitely underestimating support for Harris, if anyone.
I guess, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Who do you want to give it to?
I mean, I'll just for tiebreaker, we can just use Polymarket having Harris as the narrow lead.
Okay. So we'll put Harris for Nevada.
Right, North Carolina, most right leaning out of the swing states as far as tradition goes. Before '08, the last time it had gone blue was 1976 for Jimmy Carter.
Hmm.
And then after that, it just went by .33 to Obama in '08. And it stayed slightly on the right side since then. You
Yeah.
know, I
Yeah.
put it blue just for fun. But I generally right now, even though this has been dropping very quickly, I mean, if it'll show me a little graph, where's it at? There it is. There it is. There it is. Yeah, I mean, even like 50, 57. That's actually not that long ago. Really? Okay, so actually it has been pretty consistent. I thought it dropped a lot more. Maybe
Yeah,
never
and
mind. But
I think North Carolina is one of those states again. I think we're all most Democrats are sort of hoping against hope that this is their election to get North Carolina. And I know they've been trying to get North Carolina ever since 2016, when they first faced off against Trump. But North Carolina, yeah, obviously we had the whole Mark Robinson thing. He is going to get blown out, by the way, but it's probably going to be a disaster for him, 20, 30 points. But I think that will affect him a bit. I think it'll affect Trump a bit, maybe a point or two, in terms of what he would usually win. Could you take a look at what he won in 2020 for North Carolina?
1.2, 1.3.
Okay, so yeah, it's been very close. It's been very close. Now, I don't think, yeah, I don't think it'll be 2 points that he'll lose, but I do think he will lose a lot more, in North Carolina than we do think he will. I think it'll be, North Carolina could also be one of those states that is extremely close, just like Nevada and Pennsylvania. But I still tend to believe that North Carolina will go to Republicans, but I don't know. What do you think?
I basically think even though they have it at like 56-44, I think it's basically toss up. I've seen, tons of Harris's rallies with large audiences. So I mean, that's not oh my word. Um, I mean, that's not, just the true signifier of how the race is going to go, obviously. But I mean, it's only, within like 2 points shifting to the left that it would tip. So I mean, if anything, it's definitely going to be within just a few thousand votes. But I would put it down right now for tilt. We're gonna have to see if the Robinson debacle actually does end up turning into much of anything.
Right, and I just don't. So you have North Carolina as red, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. I did put that. as red. I do think I could see it going blue. Again, I think it would be naive to say, "Oh yeah, there's no chance that Democrats win it," or "There's a very low chance." There is a very real chance that they do win it. But as it stands, I just don't see them having just enough to edge out the Republicans, which would be within like a point or so, which again they don't have at the moment.
All right, now let's get how about Wisconsin? Because I mean that one's been interestingly blue as far as poly market goes. I mean it was much higher earlier on. I think it was up to like 61 at one point. Yeah, like last week was at 61. It's actually been dropping quite a bit in the
Yeah,
meantime, but it still is definitely a bit blue. So I mean, I
right,
I have it tilt blue. It's demographic wise, it is the most Republican. It always votes to the right. It was the most right shift leaning for Trump flipping it in 2016, and then it voted to the least for Biden in 2020. But I mean, it still has voted with the other two states each and every time.
right, and obviously Republicans did hold the RNC in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, so they did realize just how important Wisconsin was in terms of winning it, and I think they're when Biden was still in the race, you got to keep in mind when Biden was still in the race, Democrats had lost Wisconsin. It was gone. Okay, Trump had it. He nearly, he was just destroying you in every poll. But when you see, if you take a look at the poly market polls for what's it called for Wisconsin, yeah, just if you open it, you see a major shift right after Biden dropped out, and that is significant. I mean, yeah, look at that. They were at 36,
Within within
and now
within
they're
a
at
week, within a
56.
week, within a week, it went from a third of a chance to 50-50.
Right, and I think that says a lot, and I think that'll hold for election day. I think out of all three of the Rust Belt states, Wisconsin is most likely to go to Democrats. So I do say I did say that Republicans will lose Wisconsin, giving it to Democrats.
Mm,
I think it'll be within 2 points. It could be less,
absolutely,
it could be
it's
more,
gonna be
but yeah, I think it'll
close.
be within 2 points. Yeah,
I think it
I think
might
it'll
go.
be a bit more of a margin than what Biden got.
Yeah, I actually think it will go a bit more blue than what Biden got. Just because of continual, shifting in the suburban areas, which are definitely important. I'm not sure that there's actually going to be enough loss for the Republicans in the urban regions to actually break down the gains that are being made. But I do see then Wisconsin shifting more to the right in 2028 and beyond. I think it potentially may become more of a Republican stronghold state in the future. Now, Michigan is generally
Right.
actually the most left leaning out of the trio here. I believe
Hmm.
we just have them two left. Yep. So the most left leaning out of the trio, 2.8 points for Biden, and then it was the least red in 2016. And in 2012, it was the most blue, and in 2008, it was the most blue, and it was the most blue in 2004 and in 2000. So it's been the most blue out of the trio for a long time. It has the best demographics for Democrats out of the three, highest college graduate percentage, more urbanized, I think. So I mean, generally overall, it does definitely perform well for Democrats. You have it tilt, I have it lean.
Hmm. Yeah, I do think Michigan will go blue. Whether it's tilt or lean doesn't really matter. I do think again it'll be very close, just like Wisconsin. Um, Within 2 points, I would say in this election, especially just because of how close these polls are compared to 2020. And I mean, we see some similarities between this election and 2020, but I think there's something to be said about how close this election really is. And I do think that this 2 points, yeah, I mean, yeah, we see Harris plus two, Harris plus one,
But I mean, this
Harris
one
plus eight. I don't really,
a
yeah,
little
it's a bit
left leaning, but
skewed.
that was 1300. So I mean, that's a bit less of a margin of error than some of these other ones.
Right, but I just, again, I still think that Harris will win Michigan. Thus, what is she at then at that point if she
57.
wins
Whoever wins, it's
Michigan?
down to Pennsylvania.
Right. Okay. So I'll let you start this one off because I know you're from Pennsylvania. So
Yeah,
why don't you lead us into this?
I personally do see Harris managing to win Pennsylvania. I mean, she
Really?
had multiple rallies in some outer regions, not even in the urban areas where Biden would typically campaign. I mean, there was one in Philadelphia where she had a ridiculously large turnout, and then Trump, everyone knows he had a campaign rally outside of Pittsburgh in Butler County, and he got shot. So, I mean, the opinions. I mean, that's not necessarily saying the opinion of him in general in the state, but I mean, the viewing of him as a whole in the state, and I mean, it's very. I think again, I live in a very democratic region, so I mean that probably distorts it. But I do go. My mom's parents live. My mom's mom lives in West Virginia down here, so we go through the rural area of Pennsylvania every single time we go down there. And I mean, I've seen and less Trump signs from 2016 to 2020 to 2024. I've seen almost none. So I mean, comparatively to previous years, I'd almost say that it's looking almost like an even bigger victory than in 2020. But I mean, the polls are
Right.
obviously not saying that unless we end up with a 2022 situation again where they underestimate Democrats, which is very possible. It's just not
Mm.
very probable.
Yeah, and then typically in general elections, ever since Trump's been in this game, the polls do tend to underestimate him rather than Democrats. In terms of midterms, yeah, they do. Obviously, we know there was no red wave, but in terms of general election, I think they do tend to underestimate Trump. And I think for me, looking at it from the outside, I don't know what's going on the ground in Pennsylvania. I really don't. But based on what I've
I bet
seen,
you, me with the inside and you looking on the outside with no bias, we could probably do a whole 20-minute video figuring out what's going on in
yeah,
Pennsylvania.
we could. We could, yeah. And I think Pennsylvania is one of those, yeah, it will decide the election. Let's just put it straight. It will decide the election.
I think Nate Silver's Silver Bulletin, I think, has it as like a 70% chance of deciding who will win the presidency this year.
Yeah. And obviously, whoever wins this wins the election. So I just, I tend to lean slightly Republican for Pennsylvania just because of how close this election has been. And keep in mind, Biden was getting smoked in Pennsylvania. If you take a look at the poly market polls, can you take a look at the poly market numbers when Biden was still in the race? I mean, look at that. He's
A
down to
quarter.
28.
A quarter.
28. This is not something that happens overnight. Obviously, there was a lot of work that went into it, but then again, I look at Trump and I look at the assassination attempt that happened in Pennsylvania. I'm not, again, I do agree with you. I don't think that's going to shift the entire state, but I do think there's some significance there. I think that symbolism, the fact that he got shot in Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania could very well decide the election, that could inspire some people to vote. But yeah, if Butler County is blue, right?
It shifted
Yeah.
4.4 points to Biden from 2016 to 2020. Now, the interesting thing is
Okay.
Erie County is seen as a what are they called? But it's one of the counties that basically like can show how the state as a whole goes because I think in 2016 state 0.72, 1.6 for Trump. 2020 statewide 1.2, 1 point for Biden. So it's like 0.8 of a point off, but it kind of shows where the state as a whole goes. And there was a poll done in Erie County, Pennsylvania, that I think Harris was leading by like 2 points or so. So if that does hold up, obviously, then Bellwether County. Um, then I mean that would definitely be a good sign as well. I mean, then West Northampton County, sort of the same thing, 3.8, and then 0.72. That's going to be That's a 4.5 point shift and a 2.6 point shift. Which one's closer? 1.9. So definitely Erie County is closer. But um, looking at the bellwether counties can definitely potentially tell a good bit about how the general state's gonna look, and if this is what it comes down to, then the smallest details definitely matter.
Yeah. So what are you putting for pen? Blue?
I say we put it blue. I mean, this is so close. I mean, it's just down to Pennsylvania at this point. But I mean, it would be within just a few thousand votes.
Right. I think yeah, this is going to be one of the closest, if not the closest election in terms of Pennsylvania for sure. And I really don't know what's going to happen on election day. I really don't. Um, I don't know. It could shift. I mean, it could. But that does give Harris the presidency 276 to 262, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's quite a shift from what we saw in June when it was Trump versus Biden right after the debate. I mean, that was a complete disaster for
Yeah, like
Democrats. They really turned it around.
2 weeks after the debate, Trump was winning in the polls in Minnesota, New Hampshire,
Yeah,
Virginia.
that is nearly unheard of in recent American elections. And then you had the whole assassination attempt as well. That also boosted him quite a bit. Then they did the switch. Harris came in, had a good VP pick, and it's been completely different game since then.
But I mean, considering how much things have changed in the past, 50 days, there's no knowing what's going to happen over the next 50 days. So I mean, this could definitely change
Yeah,
over
yeah.
the
I
weeks
mean,
before election day.
obviously it can, and I do definitely think that there will be some states that will be a bit more in favor of a specific candidate, such as Arizona or Georgia or North Carolina. We'll get a better idea of what's really going to happen. But the reality is, these are all polls, these are all numbers that we have, but there are a lot of numbers that we don't yet have, and that we're only going to get on election day. And that is what's actually going to determine what's going to happen. So, if you are an American citizen, make sure to vote.
Vote, 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 vote. All right, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Yeah, thank you very much, man.